Will you pray with me? Word of God, you have done everything when we were still sinners. You came to save us, and having saved us by your grace, you have been given us these scriptures as a firm footing, and sent your Script to reveal them to us. We praise you for this lamp that guides us to our feet and lights our path. Amen. We will be reading out of Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 1 through 5 and 12 through 15. Moses summoned all Israel and said, "Hear, Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us. With all of us who are alive here today, the Lord spoke to your face to face out of the fire of the mountain. At that time I stood between the Lord and to you to declare the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain." And he said, "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male or female servants may rest, as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Ooh. Albert Brooks is a professor of public policy at Harvard Business School, and for the last several years he's been doing a lot of writing about positive psychology, that branch of study that talks about what it is, solves that age-old riddle of what it is that makes humans happy. And he describes a conversation that he had with a successful Wall Street financier who was highly respected and at the top of her game. And she reached out to him because rather than finding satisfaction in all of her achievements and the respect that her profession had garnered for her, she felt this kind of hollowness begin to settle into her life, like she was missing a step, like her instincts weren't quite as crisp as they used to be. Her decision-making wasn't quite on the spot as it had been. And she used to have this dynamic where she would walk into a room and command it, whoever was in there. But now she could feel all of the junior associates doing the mental checking out, and like they were all saying in collective voice, "Okay, boomer, we see you." And so she started, having this sense of like, who am I? So she reached out to Albert Brooks, and he asked her all kinds of questions about her life, and she was remarkably honest in this interview, and she said that she was not particularly happy, hadn't been so in years. Her marriage was not living up to the expectations she had for it. Her relationship with her college kids was okay, but they were distant, and she didn't have any really close friends with whom she could be open and vulnerable and known. She worked long hours, was exhausted a whole lot of the time, and copes with all of the stress and dissatisfaction by maybe drinking a little bit too much. Work had become the gravitational center of her life. But she could feel her ability to stay at the top slipping away from her, even as she acknowledged that all of the performance and the success that followed from performing hadn't quite delivered on its promise. And this life that she imagined would be hers felt further away year after year. And so Brooks, who's a thoughtful, compassionate sort, he asked her some follow-up questions. Well, why don't you consider making a few changes? You could always invest more time in your marriage. You could spend more time with your kids. It's not too late. You could get some help with your drinking. Maybe try to get a little bit more sleep or try an exercise regimen. If killing it at work is slowly killing you, then why not invest somewhere else? And she paused. She thought really long and hard about that question. And then she responded with this absolutely haunting line. Maybe I'd prefer to be special rather than happy. Anyone can do the things it takes to be happy, go on vacation, spend time with friends and family, but not everyone can accomplish great things. Maybe I'd rather be special than happy. Those are words of a woman who is overworked, underrested, discontent, all of which are symptoms of an overworked culture. We've come into this historical moment where we are historically restless. Leisure time across the West has decreased by 37% since 1960. And to put that in perspective, that means that as much as one whole month has been added to a full-time job over and against what it was in the 1960s. The theorists who posited that we would have all these technological advances and they would give us lives of abounding leisure in the future, they were right about the innovation and all of the skill and usefulness of labor-saving devices. They just were dead wrong about human nature. All that technology has made it possible for us is to carry our work with us wherever we go, to not leave the work that we have for longer stretches of time. It's worked exactly in the opposite of the way that it was predicted, multiplying our labor, not multiplying our leisure. So we are overworked, but we're also underrested. Forbes' article noted that only 14% of Americans take 2 weeks off in a row in a given year. Same study reports that as of 2017, 54% of American workers did not use up their vacation time in the year before, leaving 662 million days reserved for leisure unused. All of that is in keeping with an overwork culture. So, whereas the ability to engage in leisure used to be reserved for pharaohs and kings, and now we have this case where those who have the most disposable income, the most ability to spend their money and time in leisure, are also the ones working the longest hours. The lack of leisure has actually become a bit of a status symbol. You'll see commonly this, humble brag up on Twitter, or a celebrity post of a picture with themselves wearing just enough makeup to not look like they're wearing makeup. Baggy sweats, and all that stuff. Oversized sweatshirt. Oh, I have no life because of my job, or I so need a vacation. As if to say, really, I'm so needed. I'm special. And the thing is, even when we do go on vacation, a lot of us don't know how to turn off that productivity switch. And so we just translate it into our vacations. This leads us to maximize our itineraries, to stack as many activities and boutique experiences as we can, to try to stack up a bit of an experiential resume as a buffer against the hollowness and helplessness that we feel at work. So that one of the craziest paradoxes we have of modern life is this: we are overcommitted, tired, restless, and bored all at the same time. And that kind of discontent of planning and scheming and killing ourselves with work in service of a distant, better life, well, we forget all of that this pattern of work and no rest is shaping us to become the kind of people who actually don't know how to rest. The kind of people who are formed into those who can't be present to God, to others, who can't enjoy the abundance of the life that we're actually living. So yeah, maybe I'm not killing it on Wall Street, but I can't help but wonder if I have traded in on an illusion and thought that being special was more fulfilling than being happy. So is there some wisdom in the life of the church? Is there a story of God's liberation of his people? Is there a practice that we see in the life of Jesus that helps us reform and recover our relationship to work and time so that we can be a community of rest in a culture of exhaustion? Well, we are in an 8-week series recovering the spiritual disciplines to build a trellis, a scaffolding for our life. And there is such a practice. Chief among it is Sabbath. If you have been around for a while, back in 2021, we did a 6-week study on Sabbath. I'm not going to cram all of that into today's message. But I do want to lay a theological foundation that I think can be a sturdy place for us from which to build. Because more than most, I think a lot of us have this strange relationship with this word Sabbath. Some of you are like, yes, all right, I'm in, a day to rest and delight, to be with people, to be with God, sign me up. You people are called mothers of small children. Others of you, however, the word maybe comes with some baggage. Maybe you came from a religious culture that took the concept seriously, but the execution looked more like legalism in service of a holy but distant God. And so this ancient command, do no work, got translated practically as have no fun. The practice became another burden of a stressed out people already with a tortured relationship to time, rather than a life-giving practice of abiding with Jesus. Others still, you like everything you've heard about Sabbath, but it sounds like it's coming from some privileged echo chamber of people who actually have the freedom to choose not to work 2 jobs just to put food on the table and clothes on the kids' back. You're on board. It's just not your life. And so for you, Sabbath rest sounds something like the American dream. It's available for some, but others are on the outside looking in. And maybe there's a whole lot of us kind of in the in-between of those spaces. We are longing for it. We're catching it in glimpses. And so maybe a good starting point for everybody then is to just talk about how Sabbath is actually rooted in the character and nature of God. It appears in Genesis as a rhythm that's woven into creation itself. The humans who bear God's image are created on the 6th day, and then on creation it ceases on the 7th, on a Sabbath day. And so our first ancestors have this day where they experience rest and delight and the rhythm of work one day, or a rhythm of work 6 days, and then rest one day. It's one day to refrain from working, to stop. And this rhythm is embodied in the God who ceases creation on the 7th, on a Sabbath day. And so our first ancestors' first day of life was one of rest and delight. But it doesn't take a whole lot of time before this rhythm gets interrupted. The human story being what it is, it gets challenged by the external forces outside of us and the internal drives within us. And so God appears again in the Exodus as the liberator of a Sabbathless people. People who had been ground down by oppression, reduced to human doings by Pharaoh. Trapped and warped by the lie that you are what you do, that your identity is wrapped in your productivity. And so upon taking his people out of Egypt, mud from the brick pit still in between their toes, God lays out a vision of flourishing in 10 words, 10 commandments that pulls the people all the way back to the vision of Eden. It tells them to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Remember that you are not just made for work. Remember that there was a rhythm of life breathed into you at the beginning of creation. And by the time this command comes around, again in Deuteronomy, it's 40 years have passed. The people have been wandering in the wilderness. They're on the threshold of the promised land. Here he is speaking to a generation of people who grew up away from bondage, who came of age in transition, who knew the stories of their parents and their grandparents, but had no felt experience of slavery themselves except for the memory that was passed down generationally in their bodies. So Deuteronomy is translated as the second law or the second giving of the law. And whereas in Exodus the first word is remember, in Deuteronomy it is changed to observe, as in celebrate, prepare for, enjoy it. This is a day to relish. The middle part of the command is basically the same. Your male servant, your female servant may rest as well as you do, or to say it another way, that they get the same rest that you get. This is scheduled social justice. Sabbath is a day when everyone gets to rest, not just those at the top, even the animals. But where the Exodus story ends by recalling the creation story, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. At the end of Deuteronomy, we get an entirely different rationale. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. A little shift, but the entire meaning of the day has changed. It's totally different than in Exodus. You see, in Exodus, it is looking back to God's intent in Eden. And in Deuteronomy, it is looking back to God's deliverance from Egypt. By the time the Sabbath command comes around again, it comes as a warning: do not go back to Egypt, that place where you have no value, no freedom, no dignity, no rest. And, just as important, do not create an Egypt for others in this new land that God is giving to you. You will be a people where justice is present, where everyone gets to rest. You will be a people who stop allowing your identity to be wrapped up in your work. You will allow God to breathe life back into your lungs every week. You were made for more. You have infinite dignity and value, even when you do nothing at all. So yeah, I have more than a hunch that this is more than just a word for an ancient marginalized people. Reflecting on the rest stolen from her ancestors, Cole Arthur Riley writes this: when we rest, we do so in memory of rest denied. We receive what has been withheld from ourselves and our ancestors, and our present respite draws us into remembrance of those who were not permitted it. When I rest my eyes, I meet those ancestors and they meet me as time blurs within us. They tell me to sit back. They tell me to breathe. They tell me to walk away like they couldn't. Rest is an act of defiance. It is the audacity to face the demands of this world and proclaim, we will not be owned. And so yeah, you may not have the weight of Pharaoh's chains holding you to your desk at work, but that does not mean you don't have Pharaoh's voice living in your head. To one degree or another, we are all subject to this idea that we are what we produce. It's crept into the way that we see ourselves and the way that we value others. And so friends, I have this thought that in a culture of exhaustion like ours, becoming a community that frames our week around a day of rest, maybe it can just be the most subversive and countercultural thing we can do. Pete Scazzaro describes 4 dimensions, 4 meanings that are contained within the word Sabbath itself, 4 shades that rotate around like a diamond in the sun. They are stop, rest, delight, and worship. So when you see that word Sabbath, all of those meanings are packed into it. And so maybe as a way of reclaiming this ancient practice and asking how can we step into this life-giving rhythm of work and rest as we abide in Jesus, I want to use these 4 words as a kind of roadmap and touch briefly on each. And so the first of those is stop. And actually the English word Sabbath is translated from the Hebrew Shabbat, and it means most literally to cease, to stop. Stop working, stop worrying, stop striving, stop wanting, stop doing, just stop. It is a day to let the dishes pile up in the sink, to let the work phone calls go to voicemail. It's a day to say no to the culture of exhaustion. And I know, even as I say that, some of you are picturing dishes in the sink and you're stressing out. Trust. The dishes will be there. Maybe some ants too, but still. But here's the thing, this is grace. It's a call to stop functioning as though you and I are indispensable. And the first thing we might discover if we actually stop for long enough is just how addicted we are to productivity and to work, or that we don't know who we are when we are not working. But even deeper than this command to stop is an invitation to stop trying to have control, to let go of the relational and spiritual burdens of everything that's going on as well. And we've all been there, right? We've all been in that place, and usually it's our families that feel it, where we are doing something. Our bodies are present in one location. Our minds are a million miles away, fixated on some problem that we cannot solve. There was this time not too long ago where Jill and I met some friends at an Atlanta United game, right? A lot going on in an Atlanta United game. A lot of people around, lots of things. Did we take Marta to get there? I don't even remember. I barely remember. All I know is that I was so fixated on this problem, this conflict that I was having, that I don't remember any bit of the conversation. I sort of remember that Columbus won, but I was not checked out the entire time, turning over the Rubik's Cube in my head. And the thing is, do you think that for all that agonizing that I did that day, that I fixed the problem, that I come in the next day and it was like, I got it? Nope. But did I miss out on a chance to connect and hang out with my friends and my wife? Yeah. It takes time and it takes practice to trust that the world is not going to fall apart if we let God be God. To trust that He'll sustain us. My friend Mark has this thing where when he was battling through cancer, and we heard his story a couple weeks ago, where he was reading Psalm 23 and it just hit him. He was struck by the line, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." And he said that cancer was this season where God was making him lie down. He didn't want to do it. And it reminded me of something that Wayne Mueller wrote, that if we don't rest, our illnesses, our diseases, those become our Sabbath for us. One way or another, Sabbath will find you. But that's not a threat, because Sabbath is a green pasture. And again, that's an easy prayer to recite. It takes a lifetime to get it into your bones. For many of us, work is our way of trying to become godlike without having to actually deal with God. And it looks like anxious toil. When my sales goal, or my marketing deck that I have to prepare for tomorrow, or my performance review, or my SAT scores, or whatever it is, becomes a way for me to determine my worth and my significance, the only way I can rest is by becoming addicted to striving and to this temporary high that I might get when others affirm my fragile sense of self. But that is not rest at all. And the crazy thing is, our culture is more than happy to support us in this addiction. I mean, for most other addictions you go to, people will tell you to go to a place of recovery. But when you're addicted to work and achievement, you're generally going to get rewarded, admired, and promoted. And so Sabbath is both the diagnosis and the prescription for this cultural narcotic of overwork. And stopping for one day a week, we take ground in the war against our soul. One of the things the Sabbath does wherever you are is if you stop working for 24 hours, you come to the realization that you cannot get it all done. And that is exactly the point. Sabbath protects you from the lie that you can transcend your limitations. Because if you stop working, the world is going to continue. Because God is sustaining it. But if Jesus stops working, everything falls apart. So the first invitation is to stop, to reframe our relationship with our work. And for most of us, we'll stop working when the work is finished. But Sabbath is worship. It is not a reward. It's not the carrot at the end of the stick that comes when we get everything done. And we need to hear this. If you only set aside work when you are finished, your work is ruling and reigning over you, not the other way around. And you need to have an identity breathed back into you. So yeah, to use Paul's language, taking a Sabbath is a way of not conforming to the patterns of this world. But in order to resist, you need to know what it is that you are resisting, what has you in its grip, what and where you need to cease. We need to know what grinds us down, what whispers in our ears, you're lazy, you need to get up and get back to work, what robs us of our joy and peace. And Sabbath is a command not to put on what God has removed, not to put on an identity that God has parted the sea to remove from you. So Sabbath first is an invitation to stop and then to rest. So what do you do in that place after you've stopped all your work? And honestly, the answer is pretty simple. Whatever gives you life. Whatever brings joy to your soul. Whatever brings you to an awareness of, an appreciation of how God has provided for you. Take a nap. Take a bike ride. Play guitar. Bake brownies. Stroll along the Beltline with no aim in sight. Tending to your tomatoes in your garden. But for any of that stuff to happen, you need to learn how to rest. And most basically, that means sleeping. I mean, rest is physical before it is anything else. And 40% of Americans are, by definition, sleep deprived. That is, we get less than the recommended 7 hours of sleep. And I think we just keep moving that back every year. Of like, no, it's less. You only need 7 hours. It's going to be 6 hours before too long. The average person sleeps 20% less than we did 100 years ago. And I mean, just think about the increases in mental health that we have seen. A lot of it is because we simply don't know how to rest. And there's so much wisdom from the rabbinic tradition on this. While we tend to mark the day by the sunrise, like the day starts when we wake up and we get our day going, we start to work. The Bible's pattern is actually very different from this. In the poetry of Genesis, as you read the creation story, each day ends with the refrain, there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. That's the pattern. Evening first and then morning. As if to say that we and all things are created to live each day from a place of ceasing and resting. I mean, just think about this. Like, our bodies are made for 8 hours of sleep. Which means God's good intention for us is to spend a third of our lives unconscious and unproductive. Sabbath is a day to get that into our bodies, to curl up on a blanket, to throw on your slippers, to rest, to let your bodies come to rest. It's also a day to come to mental rest. In his great book on the Sabbath, Abraham Joshua Heschel writes this: a man who works with his mind should Sabbath with his hands, and a man who works with his hands should Sabbath with his mind. If you spend a good deal of your work life problem solving, then maybe you need to do something that puts you into a state of flow, where you're not really thinking all that much at all, you're just being. Go fishing, go hunting, whatever it is. If you spend your days doing work that isn't very mentally taxing, then maybe rest for you looks like engaging the other parts of your faculties, engaging the fullness of your humanity. But the Sabbath is given to us to reorient our perspective, to remind us that we are part of creation, that our lives take place within God's hands, and that we live out of a posture of trust. And so on the Sabbath, we stop, we rest, and then we receive life as a gift. It is a day to delight. After God finished the work of creation, he took a look at what he made and proclaimed, it was very good. He stood back and saw the creation and delighted in it. And then he blessed and made the seventh day and called it holy. And so the seventh day is not simply the end of creation. In some ways, it is the culmination of creation. It is a time to mark space and time to stand back and enjoy and in awe. Just live and inhabit goodness for its own sake. My lovely wife Jill sent me an article last week about how happiness depends on our perception of time. She's like, this is like a you thing. You should read this. totally right. And part of it was highlighting the work of this researcher at Ohio State, Celine Malcock, who describes two approaches that people take to restful activity. There are those who take an instrumental view, those who see leisure as serving as having a purpose in our lives so long as it serves another goal. Right? So like, I'm going to run because I want to lose weight, not because I actually like running. Or I'm going to take the kids to the park to check off the box of being a good parent, not because like I actually really want to go to the park. We've all been there. It's okay. It's a safe space. And then there are those who enjoy what Malcock calls terminal leisure, which sounds violent and tragic. But it's not. That's not what she means. What she's getting at is this idea of those who take on an activity where the purpose of the activity is only the fun inherent in doing the thing itself. Regardless of whether it serves any other purpose, I'm just going to hike because I want to enjoy the beauty of the trees, the crisp fall air, whatever it is. I'm going to have a game night because I want to hang out with my roommates and just enjoy being with them, not because I have this scheme to form us into a rock band or whatever it is that you do. I don't know. But it turns out that the ability to enjoy terminal leisure, just the fun for its own sake, it's a way higher predictor of happiness and satisfaction than people who enjoy things on their way to something else. And I just want to say that's the sharpening lens that Sabbath brings. We stop and we rest not only to say no to work or worry or errands or demands, or to leverage that joy to some deeper end. Joy is the end. Sabbath is just a day to say yes to things, to wonder, to delight, to get lost in the city without looking at your watch. I was thinking about this last week. In 2019, we had the opportunity as a family to take a sabbatical as kind of an extended period of rest after 15 years of ministry. And we went on some pretty amazing trips, a lot of which required a ton of planning. But some of the best moments were the entirely unscripted ones. And those are the ones that more often than not my kids will still talk about. They'll talk about playing games in the car while I was out taking photos. Or they'll talk about taking a hike to a mountain lake and gathering as many blueberries as we could find in our hands to take back to the apartment that we were renting. Or the tea and cookies and games that started out on a whim but ended up becoming a ritual at 4 o'clock every day. And at its best, Sabbath is that intentional practice of taking that one day out of 7 to pay attention to the beauty, to the joy, to the goodness that is already there. To say yes to your children, to delight in them at whatever age and stage they find themselves at. I am learning really, my kids are teenagers now. I'm learning really hard that maybe Sabbath is a day where I give them a break from my expectations and let them live in the freedom. To extend the table and laughter. To relax in the company of people who love you and who you love and who point you to God's love for you. To remind you that the joy of abiding in Him, the fruit of that is Him. And last, the Sabbath is a day to worship. Observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy. It is a day of Sabbath unto the Lord. Primarily, it is not about us. It is about who God is. It is a day set apart for gratitude and praise at the life made possible through Jesus. And joy comes naturally out of a heart that is shaped by the rhythm of stopping and resting and receiving good things and then turning that thanks back to God in wonder and awe. In other words, I think it's only after the Sabbath has really gotten into you that worship is what you crave. I love this progression that Ruth Haley Barton notes in her most recent book. She writes, I have experienced this love myself and the joy and relief that washes over me when Sabbath comes. When the house has been prepared, special food has been bought, computers have been turned off, and cell phones powered down, and it is time to stop, whether everything has been finished or not. I know what it is like to rest for hours and to have the energy to delight in something: savory food, a good book, a leisurely walk, a long-awaited conversation with someone I love. I know what it's like to feel joy, hope, and peace flow back into my body and soul when I thought it might never want to come back again. I know what it's like to see home and family, friends, and community differently through Sabbath eyes of delight in God's good gifts. I've experienced rest that turns into delight, delight that turns into gratitude, and gratitude that turns into worship. And I think that's the way it goes. It starts with our ceasing from work and trusting that God is enough. It ends in gratitude and praise. I'm going to close with this. If Sabbath is about arranging your life around a pattern of work and rest so that one day a week you can stop, rest, delight, and worship. If that's true, then ultimately Sabbath is about hope. Some of the ancient rabbis compared the Sabbath to a groom meeting his bride. And they said that every Sabbath is a proposal. Before I married Jill, I knelt down, I asked her to marry me, I put a ring on her finger, and that ring was a promise that we would spend our lives together. And so even before the day of our wedding came, from the moment that promise was made, we started to imagine what life would be like together. We started to live into this vision of a shared future, and that ring was just a constant reminder of the promise. And in the same way, every Sabbath is an invitation to preview the future that we were made for. It's a way to realign our hope toward the only one who can truly satisfy us, who is Jesus. And God has promised that the day will come when everything will be made new, when every wrong will be put to rights, when every tear will be wiped from every eye, when justice will cover the earth, when all will be made to rest, when diseases are eradicated, when every wound is healed. He will be with us, not just to employ us in His mission, but simply to enjoy us and be enjoyed by us. And so it's no accident that the Bible ends with the wedding feast of the Lamb at the marriage of heaven and earth. It's a reminder of this future. And God gives us a Sabbath each week to remind us of where we are going, to give us a glimpse of the joy that is to come. And so once every 7 days, God asks us to stop. That instead of checking our work emails or working, we're invited to rest, to look up at the sky and wonder, to take a little bit of a longer time as we walk, to notice each other a little bit more, to be a little bit more leisurely, to linger longer, to simply notice. The best of what we experience on the Sabbath is just a small taste of what God has in store for us. And so every Sabbath is rehearsal for eternity. It's turning our bodies and our hope toward the one who is there to fulfill it completely.